They ask why she walks alone, as though silence must be explained, as though stillness needs witnesses, but they do not hear how the ground hums for her, how each footstep parts the dust like scripture, how the wind leans in to listen. She is not alone. She is in procession with things they cannot name. She walks alone because the path bends for her, because the crowd cannot keep pace with visions that strike like thunder under closed eyelids. They ask again, why no hand to hold, no shadow to twin her shape? But the chosen are not chosen for comfort. She walks alone because she heard a whisper that no one else did, because something inside her broke in just the right place to let the light in. Because when she fell, the earth didn't catch her. It swallowed her, whispered stories through roots, made her bones remember what the sky had forgotten. They call it loneliness. She calls it alignment. She walks through storms that never made the news, buried her fear beneath oceans of silence, taught herself to read the language of salt. And when they laugh, when they call it pride or punishment or madness, she does not turn. She walks because she knows the fire was never meant to be shared, because destiny does not ask permission to isolate, because greatness rarely travels in caravans. She walks alone because mountains are not built with company, because the stars follow her back like rumors and the moon knows her name. The chosen one walks alone because her path is sacred and unseen. She walks through places most fear to enter, not because she is fearless, but because she has been called. A call that did not come with fanfare or light, but with quiet breaking, an unraveling that others would misname as loss. Yet she knows. She knows because the world began to shift the day she stopped asking for directions. The path she follows cannot be mapped by tradition or mirrored in the eyes of others. It is a winding, breathless road carved beneath the surface of things, and it opens only to the feet of those who carry silence like a torch. She was not handed a crown. No one announced her name. No one gathered to bear witness. The anointing did not come in daylight. It came in the dark, in the hunger of her questions, in the ache of her shedding, in the long nights when even her own reflection became unfamiliar. She did not walk because she was ready. She walked because something deeper than readiness stirred. It is not courage that births the first step. It is surrender. And once you surrender, you no longer belong to the world that once held you. The sacredness of her walk is not in how others see it, but in how she knows it. She knows it by the way the wind sometimes pauses around her, the way animals do not fear her presence, the way silence thickens before she speaks. Her path was not made for the crowd, not even for those who love her. It was made for her footprints alone, because each step etches something eternal into the earth, something no one else can write. This is why the chosen one walks alone, because her every step is a sentence in a story no one else can tell. She has tried once, maybe more than once, to take others with her. She has reached back, hopeful, to lead someone into the unseen. But their steps faltered. The air became too thin. They asked for signs, for explanations, for roads with names and exits, and maps with legend. She could not give them what they wanted, because what she carries cannot be shown. It must be known. And so she learned that to be chosen is to be misunderstood. To walk a sacred path is to be mistaken for proud, for aloof, for distant. She is none of those things, but she is distant, from distraction, from noise, from paths worn by too many feet. The unseen path she follows wins through inner terrain. It demands that she leave behind even the versions of herself that once felt like home. She walks away from comfort, not out of stubbornness, but because comfort cannot teach her what the path demands. The sacred is not gentle. It peels and scalds and remakes. It does not flatter. it forges, and she walks because she has been claimed by something larger than her own will. Her solitude is not self-made. It is an echo of a promise whispered in lifetimes before she could speak. To walk this path is to live between worlds, to speak in ways that feel too vast for language, to sense things that cannot be proven, to obey what others cannot hear. She has walked into storms that had no names, through deserts that gave no shade, over bridges no one else could see. She walks because not walking is no longer an option. Her feet move not from desire but from knowing, not ambition but fire. Those who watch her do not understand. They ask, why alone? Why not settle? Why not turn around and rejoin the familiar? They think she is searching. They think she is lost. But the sacred path is not a search. It is a return. A return to the origin, the source, the seed of what she has always been but forgot in the noise of the world. Each solitary step brings her closer to the voice that called her before she had words to answer. Even in the solitude, she is not without company. The trees know her. The rain remembers. Shadows stretch long in her direction, not to haunt, but to honor. Ancestors whisper to her in the hush between her thoughts. The unseen is not empty. It is full beyond measure. It cradles her. It tests her. It requires everything from her, but gives something greater in return, clarity. Her walk is not always strong. There are days her legs tremble, days when the silence seems cruel, when the sacred feels like exile. But even then she walks, because the pain of betraying the path is greater than the pain of enduring it. Because to pause is to forget. Because when she stops, the world's noise tries to tell her she imagined it all. So she walks. She walks not because she knows the way, but because she has become the way. She moves through a world that rewards conformity, that praises followers, that crowns those who echo, and still she walks in the opposite direction. The chosen are not molded by approval. They are shaped in solitude. Their truth is too raw for applause, too real for replication. She has become comfortable in her untranslatability. She does not need to be understood. She needs only to be true. And so the sacred path becomes her prayer, her protest, her promise. It is the altar upon which she lays down everything false. It is the crucible that burns away what is borrowed. It is the mirror that shows her, piece by painful piece, who she has always been. She walks alone because the sacred requires undivided devotion. Because the path disappears the moment she tries to split herself to please others. Because the invisible road waits only for those who can see with the heart. Solitude is not loneliness. It is alignment with a higher calling. There is a silence that does not suffocate, a quiet that does not echo back emptiness. There is a space where the absence of voices becomes a chorus of truth. And in that space, the chosen one moves, not away from the world, but into herself. Solitude is not her punishment. It is her positioning. It is not the exile others assume it to be, but the sanctum where clarity sharpens, where the unseen takes form, where the eternal speaks without need of sound. She did not choose solitude out of bitterness. She entered it as a response to something ancient that stirred within her bones, something that could not bloom in the noise of the crowd. Loneliness cries out for company. Solitude listens for instruction. Loneliness fears the stillness. Solitude drinks from it. She knows the difference not from reading, not from theory, but from walking through both. There were nights loneliness wrapped around her like smoke, suffocating in its illusion of separation. But she stayed. She didn't run to fill the silence. She sat with it until it shifted, until it softened, until it revealed itself not as absence, but as invitation. And that was when she began to understand. The solitude was not empty. It was pregnant. It held the weight of something not yet spoken, not yet shaped, but wholly present. The solitude became a womb, and she, no longer just a seeker, became a vessel. Alignment is not a place one arrives at through effort. It is the result of surrender, and she surrendered not once, but daily. Every day, laying down pieces of what no longer served, she made space for what wished to be born through her. Not ambitions, not dreams shaped by outer applause, but calling, that thing older than time, that whisper in the marrow, that current that cannot be stopped even when every part of her wants rest. Alignment is a dangerous thing. It does not keep peace with comfort. It will tear away relationships that cannot hold the vibration. It will dissolve identities constructed to keep others pleased. It will burn bridges if those bridges lead to lesser versions of the self. She lost things, people, places, possibilities, but she did not lose herself. And so she won everything that matters. Solitude stripped her bare, and in that bareness she met the truth of who she is. Not the reflection others demanded, not the roles handed down, but the unshaped, radiant center of her being. She came to understand that alignment is not achievement. It is resonance. It is when the inner world hums in harmony with the divine rhythm. It is when her actions are no longer dictated by the need to be seen, but by the inner compass that points always, unshakably, to her true north. She walks in solitude because that compass becomes difficult to hear amid clamor. The alignment requires listening, deep and often. It requires space. It requires stillness that allows the subtle truths to rise. And so she chooses the quiet path, the narrow one, the one not paved by others, but revealed in her own footsteps. There are those who try to pull her back into the noise, who offer her the glitter of belonging in exchange for the dull ache of self-betrayal. But she has known the taste of alignment now. She has walked in that deep flow where time dissolves and being feels effortless, guided, alive. Once you've tasted that, you cannot return to the shallow waters. She smiles at the invitation, but her soul declines. It is in solitude that she discards the masks, the faces she wore to survive, the smiles stitched for the sake of peace, the words spoken out of obligation. She unravels them one by one until all that remains is truth, and this truth does not shout, it does not demand, it simply is, like a mountain, like a flame, like a pulse beneath the skin that says, I am here, I am whole, I am chosen. Others may mistake her withdrawal for retreat, her silence for uncertainty, her stillness for passivity. But she knows what they cannot yet see, that in solitude she is not stopping. She is sinking. She is aligning. She is allowing the divine rhythm to carry her where willpower never could. There is a difference between motion and progress, between noise and truth. She is done performing, done striving. She is letting herself be moved now, not by fear, but by knowing. This knowing is not logical. It is cellular. It lives beneath words. It moves like instinct, but carries the weight of prophecy. It tells her when to speak, and when to be still, when to act, and when to wait. It is the voice that came alive in solitude, that grew stronger each time she chose silence over approval, integrity over comfort, purpose over popularity. And now it is the voice she trusts above all. In solitude, she became her own witness. She saw herself weep without shame, rage without apology, soften without fear. She held her own contradictions with tenderness. She no longer feared breaking because she had learned that what breaks is not the truth, but the illusions wrapped around it. And every time she broke, something deeper revealed itself. She has lost count of how many selves she has shed, how many skins fell away in the night, how many versions of her died quietly under moonlight. Each time she thought the solitude would consume her, but it never did. It refined her. The alignment she carries now cannot be shaken by opinion. It is not swayed by praise or pierced by rejection. It is rooted not in arrogance but in clarity, not in resistance but in resonance. She is tuned to something that sings only in solitude, and she has learned to protect that song at all costs, even if it means walking alone, even if it means being misunderstood, even if it means being invisible to the world so she can be fully visible to herself. The world often celebrates the visible, the loud, the known, but she has come to value the unseen. The invisible architecture of alignment, the way her soul hums when she makes a decision that no one understands but feels entirely right. The way time bends when she moves from inner truth instead of outer pressure. The way life rearranges to meet her when she refuses to compromise her knowing. This is the reward of solitude, not safety, but sovereignty. She no longer sees solitude as isolation. She sees it as refinement, as tuning, as necessary distance to become undistorted. Because the world projects, it names you things that fit its understanding, but solitude strips away the projections. In solitude, she becomes the mirror, not reflecting what others want to see, but revealing what is. And when you become the mirror, you no longer chase validation. You stand in illumination. She is not untouched by longing. She still feels the ache of connection, the hunger to be seen, the softness of shared presence. But she no longer fills that hunger with the shallow or the convenient. She waits, because alignment has taught her that anything not born from that frequency will not last. She has no interest in temporary companionships that cost her her center. Her solitude has taught her patience. It has taught her discernment. It has made her a guardian of her own peace. The alignment has also made her magnetic. Even in solitude, she draws, not because she seeks, but because she is found. Those who come near now feel the gravity of her integrity. They cannot quite explain it, but they are moved by it, drawn to it, and she no longer shrinks to make herself accessible. She no longer dims to make others comfortable. She stays rooted in the solitude that gave her back her name. There was a time she feared being alone, when the quiet seemed heavy and the hours long. But that fear has been replaced by reverence, because now she understands that the solitude was never emptiness. It was space. Space for her to expand, to deepen, to become. Space for the voice of the divine to echo without distortion. Space for her own soul to speak, unfiltered by expectation. She walks now with a different posture. Not rigid, but sure. Not arrogant, but anchored. She does not chase, she attracts. She does not react, she responds. She does not seek to be understood, only to remain true. And all of this, all of it, was born from solitude. From the choice to turn inward when the world demanded outward noise, from the refusal to compromise her alignment for the sake of fitting in. What she has now cannot be bought, cannot be borrowed. It can only be cultivated. Quietly, daily, in solitude, and though others may still look at her path and see aloneness, she knows the truth. She is not alone. She is in alignment, and that is enough. Her isolation is born from inner transformation and silent strength. It was never about stepping away for the sake of drama, never about claiming distance as a badge or wielding solitude as a weapon. No, the chosen one did not drift into isolation to seem mysterious or holy. She was drawn there, pulled by the undertow of something she could neither name nor resist. It was quiet at first, the way transformation begins, not with explosions, but with cracks, small fractures in the day-to-day, glimpses of dissonance between what she did and who she truly was. The smile she wore began to feel heavier. The conversations she had no longer held nourishment. The mirrors reflected a version of her she could no longer inhabit, And so, the unraveling began. Transformation, real transformation, doesn't ask politely. It demands, it strips, it exposes, it unmakes before it remakes. And in that vulnerable state, raw, tender, emptied out, she could no longer exist in the spaces she once did. The energy was wrong, the air too shallow, the words too loud. She began to retreat, but not as an escape. It was a returning to the center, to the pulse underneath the performance, to the version of her that never needed permission. Her isolation wasn't an act of separation. It was an act of remembrance. She stepped away not to reject others, but to stop rejecting herself, to create space wide enough, deep enough, honest enough for the real work to begin. Because inner transformation cannot thrive in the crowded room of expectation. It cannot emerge when surrounded by the noise of other people's desires, projections, or limitations. It requires silence, stillness, solitude that feels at first like exile but becomes sanctuary. In that space she fell apart, but it wasn't a failure. It was an undoing of years of pretending, of pleasing, of performing. An undoing of every belief that told her she needed to be smaller, softer, quieter, less. She cried not from weakness, but from the release of carrying what was never hers. And piece by piece, she let go. Let go of roles, let go of apologies, let go of the expectation to be understandable, palatable, acceptable. She made no announcement. There was no ceremony. Just a quiet, steady disappearance from everything that no longer resonated. And when people noticed, they called it isolation. They asked what was wrong. They offered comfort, advice, distraction. But she knew what they could not know, that nothing was wrong, that everything was finally, exquisitely, breaking into alignment. She could not explain that the loneliness they feared on her behalf had become her teacher, her companion, her mirror. She could not explain that silence had begun to speak in ways that words never could. So she let them wonder. She let them name her absence however they needed. She didn't need to be understood anymore. She only needed to be true. The strength it takes to isolate while the world is calling you back. To gatherings, to conversations, to patterns you've outgrown, is immense. But she did not do it through defiance. She did it through devotion. Devotion to becoming. Devotion to truth. Devotion to the version of her waiting on the other side of the shedding. That kind of strength is not loud. It doesn't stomp or shout or boast. It is the strength of the seed that splits open underground in darkness with no one watching. The strength of the moon that waxes and wanes without apology. The strength of the tide that rises because it must. She began to rebuild, not from the wreckage of what had fallen, but from the essence of what had been revealed. And it was here, in the heart of isolation, that her power began to hum again, a quiet hum. Not the power of dominance, not the power of control, but the power of knowing. Knowing who she is when no one else is watching. Knowing what she carries when no one else affirms it. Knowing the weight and the light of her own truth. This power could not have emerged in the crowd. It could not have been birthed in the echo chambers of approval. It needed silence. It needed space. It needed the kind of isolation that acts not as a wall, but as a womb. And in this womb, she did not remain still. She studied herself, not with judgment, but with awe. She learned the contours of her own shadow. She sat with the parts of her she had tried to exile. The anger, the grief, the fear. She gave them voice, she let them speak, and in doing so she transmuted them, not erased them, but transformed them into wisdom, into strength, into clarity. This was the inner transformation that no one else could see. The kind that doesn't show up in photos, in titles, in applause. The kind that makes you quieter, not louder, softer, but more powerful. the kind that detaches you from outcomes and roots you in process. She no longer needed to be seen to feel real. She no longer needed to be understood to feel valid. She became her own mirror, her own sanctuary, her own truth teller, and still, the isolation remained. Not because she was unreachable, but because so few could meet her where she now stood. Not because she rejected others, but because she refused to return to spaces that dishonored her evolution. Her presence became more intentional, her words more sparse. She no longer explained her choices. She no longer shrank to soothe discomfort. She carried herself like a secret she was no longer trying to share. Her strength was now woven into her being, not as armor, but as fabric. Not as defense, but as foundation. She moved with a slowness that was not hesitance, but deliberation. She responded instead of reacting. She chose solitude over noise, alignment over acceptance, authenticity over inclusion. And in doing so, she became a force, a quiet one, but no less powerful. She could walk into a room and change its frequency without speaking. She could stand in the face of misunderstanding without bending. She could hold space for others without losing herself in the process, because her strength was no longer conditional. It was no longer borrowed. It was no longer a performance. It was presence. And this presence had been forged in the crucible of isolation. Not just time alone, but the kind of aloneness that demands everything and gives nothing until you surrender. The kind that strips you of all you thought you needed until you discover what cannot be taken. That is where her strength came from, not from books, not from mentors, not from praise, but from the nights she sat with her own aching heart and chose to stay, chose to breathe, chose to believe there was something sacred unfolding, even in the silence. This is why she no longer fears solitude, why she no longer chases connection for the sake of avoiding herself. She has met herself now, in her fullness, in her fragility, in her fury and her grace. And because of that, she is unshakable. Not untouchable. She still feels deeply, but unshakable in her essence. She has walked through the wilderness of her own undoing and emerged with a voice that does not tremble. That voice is not always loud, but it is sure. It speaks only when it has something to say. It does not argue with ignorance. It does not beg to be believed. It knows that truth does not need consensus, it only needs clarity, and clarity is what she gained in her isolation. A clarity so piercing that anything misaligned now feels unbearable. She cannot unsee, she cannot unknow, she cannot unfeel, and so she walks with a different rhythm, one dictated not by the ticking of clocks or the urgency of others, but by her own internal tide. She honors it, she trusts it, she lets it guide her, even when it leads her away from the crowd, especially then, because the crowd does not define her, the silence does, the solitude does, the inner knowing that emerged when everything else fell away, that defines her. Others still try to pull her back, with nostalgia, with guilt, with the promise of ease, but ease is not what she seeks. She seeks alignment, and if alignment means walking alone, she walks. If alignment means being misunderstood, she accepts it. If alignment means sitting in the quiet of her own soul while the world turns its back, she leans into it. Because isolation, for her, is no longer exile. It is empowerment. It is not something she suffers, but something she chooses, again and again, as a declaration of devotion to the truth within her, as a commitment to live from that place, no matter the cost, because she knows now, the cost of abandoning herself is always higher. She does not close herself off, her heart remains open, her spirit remains wide, but she no longer hands herself over to spaces that cannot hold her. She no longer begs to be seen, she sees herself. She no longer begs to be held. She holds herself, and in that holding, she becomes unbreakable, not because she is hard, but because she is whole. She refuses to be diluted to be accepted. There is a point in a woman's journey where the echo of her truth grows louder than the noise of the world. A point when the contortions of shrinking, of softening her tone, of rounding off the sharp edges of her fire, become too painful to sustain. She wakes to the understanding that every time she edited herself to be accepted, a piece of her authenticity was left behind. Every time she adjusted her light to make others comfortable, a thread of her own power was dimmed, and the chosen one, she reaches that point not with bitterness, but with clarity. She understands that the world rarely welcomes wholeness in women. It applauds fragments. It celebrates obedience disguised as kindness. It rewards silence mistaken for grace. But she did not come here to be fragments. So she stops, not abruptly, not with fanfare, but with the quiet finality of someone who has seen the cost. She no longer explains herself in spaces that require her to water down the truth. She no longer performs femininity in ways that serve others' comfort while choking her own voice. She no longer calls disempowerment love. Her refusal is not rebellion, it is reclamation. Reclamation of the parts of her silenced by the pressure to please, to belong, to be nice. Niceness, she knows now, was never kindness. It was the mask placed over her rage, her grief, her knowing. A mask given to her not by choice, but by inheritance, and she takes it off. To refuse dilution is not to reject connection. It is to require truth in connection. It is to say, I will not enter spaces where I must become less so others can feel more. I will not barter my voice for belonging. I will not pretend to be less passionate, less intelligent, less intuitive, less intense, less much. I am not too much. I am exactly enough. And if my fullness cannot be held, I will not shrink to fit the container. I will build a new container. Her boundaries now are not walls, but filters. They do not shut the world out. They keep herself intact. She no longer feels the need to explain why she says no, why she steps away, why she does not entertain half-hearted invitations. If someone cannot meet her in depth, she does not wade into the shallow. Her energy is sacred. Her time is precious. Her presence is earned, not demanded. And this is not pride. It is dignity. It is the dignity of someone who has been broken by compromising and has chosen never to break that way again. When she was younger, she thought acceptance was love. She thought approval was safety. But age, experience, and heartbreak taught her that the price of acceptance often comes wrapped in betrayal, betrayal of self, and nothing wounds the soul deeper than the quiet ache of betraying your own knowing to be held by someone who doesn't truly see you. Now she knows, if it costs her alignment, it's too expensive. If it requires her to be quiet when she knows she should roar, it's not home. She is not loud by default. She speaks only when the truth demands it. But when she does not soften the blow. Not because she wishes to harm, but because she refuses to lie. Her honesty is not cruelty, it is clarity. And clarity, she has learned, is often mistaken for aggression by those who benefit from her confusion. She has stopped translating her truth into a dialect others can accept. She no longer apologizes for the way her voice shakes the room. The room was built to mute her. If it crumbles, let it. There are those who will call her difficult, who will say she changed, but she knows they never truly knew her. They knew the version of her shaped to make them comfortable. They knew the smile she wore when she was aching. They knew the agreement she gave under duress. They knew the silence that masked a storm, but the real her, the whole her, was always waiting beneath the surface, and now she's surfaced. She's not here to argue. She's not here to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding her. She's here to live fully, radically, unapologetically in her truth, To refuse to be diluted is to walk away from performative peace, the kind that looks good on the outside but rots you from within. She has no interest in peace that silences her. No desire for harmony built on the sacrifice of her soul. She wants the kind of peace that comes from radical alignment. The kind that doesn't bend her into something digestible. The kind that expands to meet her as she is. And yes, this refusal comes with cost. Some doors no longer open. Some people no longer stay. Some opportunities evaporate when she no longer fits the mold. But she grieves none of it. Because what leaves when she steps fully into herself is never loss. It's liberation. What remains, what arrives, what grows in the soil of her authenticity, that is the real abundance. That is the true belonging, not to others but to herself. She has stopped chasing potential in people, in places, in paths. She no longer wastes her magic in the hope that someone will rise to meet it. She sees clearly now. Potential is a ghost. What is present is what matters. She meets people where they are, not where they might be. And she lets them go when staying requires her to regress. Evolution is her compass now. Anything that requires her to pretend she is still who she once was is already gone. She no longer begs to be loved. She is love. She no longer seeks to be validated. She is truth. Her worth is no longer on the table. It is not a negotiation. It is a fact. She wears her wholeness like armor that breathes. She walks into rooms not asking, "Will they like me?" but asking, "Is this in alignment with who I am becoming?" And if the answer is no, she leaves. Her presence now is not a plea. It is a gift, and she gives it wisely, not sparingly, but intentionally, not from fear, but from discernment. Because she knows that to be accepted while diluted is not belonging, it is erasure, and she will not erase herself again, not for love, not for legacy, not for a seat at a table that would prefer her quiet. She will build her own table, one wide enough for her full truth, one sturdy enough for her fire, one sacred enough for her silence. The woman who refuses to be diluted is often feared, misunderstood, mocked, but she is also remembered, revered, respected, not always immediately, but eventually, because the world knows what she is, even if it pretends not to. The world feels her weight, her frequency, her refusal, and that refusal changes things. It shifts dynamics, it cracks systems, it births new blueprints. She is not here to be liked. She is here to be real, and real is rare. Real is uncomfortable. Real makes people look at their own masks, but she didn't come here to coddle illusions. She came to embody the truth, even if it makes others uncomfortable, especially if it does. She knows now that love is not measured by how much she can bend. It is measured by how fully she can stand and still be held. So she stands, she takes up space, she breathes without apology, she laughs from her gut, she says no without guilt, she says yes without fear. She stops pretending, and in that stopping she begins. Again, anew, alive. The road she walks is not always easy. It is not paved with understanding. It is not filled with warm welcomes, but it is hers. It is forged by her footsteps, claimed by her decisions, sanctified by her integrity. She walks it not because she has to, but because she can, because her spirit demands it, because her ancestors whisper it, because the future calls it forth. She will not be watered down to soothe the thirst of those who refuse to rise. She will not be reduced to fit a frame that cannot hold her wildness. She will not be bent, broken, or belittled into being manageable. She is not here to be manageable. She is here to be magnificent, to be massive in her energy, to be a storm and a calm, a question and an answer, a wound and a healer. She is not either, or she is all. And still, she does not carry this with cruelty. Her refusal is not laced with hate. It is wrapped in sacred self-respect. She does not shout for the sake of volume. She speaks when silence would be a betrayal. Her strength is not loud, but it is unmistakable. Her presence is not overpowering, but it is unforgettable. She is not diluted. She is distilled, concentrated essence, unmixed with approval, unblended with fear. She is not a version. She is not a draft. She is the final form, the culmination of everything she has survived, released, remembered. She is not waiting to become. She is, and that is enough.